Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Seams. I'm Jeremy Angel.
And I'm Jonathan Lippman.
And I'm Richard Green. And today we're going to be airing my interview with Suttirat Larlarb.
Yes, it was a great interview with Suttirat, and I think her career is quite an interesting one, and just listening to her talk is just lovely as well. She's done some great projects. If you think about Steve Jobs, American Gods, as you talk about the new Bond film, and of course the Olympic ceremony.
Yes, the Olympics.
Yeah, I think her career it's interesting because she comes primarily from theatre, but she also does production design and costume design in the way that a theatre practitioner as a designer would do set and costume. So she's a multidisciplinarian, as they would describe her. I don't know who they is, but as I would describe her.
She actually does comment with what you've just said, Jonathan, with how she talks about Danny Boyle. The way he likes to work is people who've part of a bigger picture, and that's one of the things that clearly comes across as her strength. Because of that, she looks outside of costume.
Yeah, and she's fortunate that she's been able to have jobs that enable her to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is great is the fact that, it's basically her parents are Thai. She's born in America, and she's designing the costumes for the British opening ceremony of the British Olympics, with everything that's British. And it's interesting how she must have brought a sort of slightly different eye to that than a domestic designer may have done.
The two university degrees, were they both in costume design?
Her bachelor's degree was in art, and then I think after a period of time she then went on to do her MA at Yale in the field of drama. But as I think she says, she wasn't primarily costume. She was just interested in the whole theatre scene initially, I think, when she came to London.
I find what's fascinating with Suttirat's story as well is she wasn't ever, again, it's like so many of the designers we've spoken to, she wasn't wanting to go into costume to begin with, but it took meeting someone on something else that suddenly sparked it, and away she went. And it started from that rather than something she started to want the whole time. And I find it amazing that there's so many different designers that all have different callings, as it were. So some wanted to be it from a young age, others didn't know it but found it and fell in love, and that's where they want to go. So
I'm trying to think of many examples of people who actually sort of at 10 or 11, I think there have been a couple of said,
we've had a few we've spoken to who said it, and that they knew they wanted to be into costume. And I mean, you take Julian Day, for example. He said he was always making costumes for his toys, and other people, Anne Masgrave was always sewing, Susie Harmon was always making. But some people have said they wanted to do it. Other people have sort of gone into it through other ways. When it comes out in interviews we've got coming forward with Ian Fulcher, Nat Turner, Matt Price, they knew they wanted to do something, and then they found costume rather than
and there do seem to be almost sort of like three routes, don't there? There's the fashion, I'm interested in clothes and fashion. There's the art, I'm interested in drawing, and I'm interested in sort of, that leads me to fine art and looking at, period paintings and looking at the costumes that those people are wearing and going that way. And then there's just kind of stumbled into it by mistake.
And it's wonderful. You have to admit that's a great thing, that there is the fact that to be a designer, you don't have to have started doing it at age dot. You can come into it at any point. You can make a career change if that's what you want to do. And
and it is a very, very broad church that sort of encompasses all sorts of talents and all sorts of way into it. I mean, I always said if I'd been born slightly earlier, I probably would have had Action Man when I was a kid, and I could have got all this military nonsense out of my system by the time I was about 11 or 12 and gone on to do a real job. But unfortunately, Action Man came a little bit too late for me, so I wasn't dressing up dolls when I was in my teens, so thank God. But
you discuss the interview with Suttirat. You discuss Bond in an abstract way, I suppose, is the best way of putting it.
I mean, I'd have gone into it far more, but of course, she's very constrained by what she can and what she can't say,
which is completely understandable. And But the question I have is, with a Bond film, because those have also changed in the last 20 odd years, how they work from a costume point of view. I'm pretty sure that your experience working with Suttirat was different from your experience working on, I don't know, GoldenEye, which would have been different. For example, had you worked on Dr. No, it would have been a completely different experience then, because the machine behind Bond and the size and all of that has changed.
Yeah.
But roughly, when did that sort of start from our point of view? Because let's be honest, if I go through the stock we've had over the years, we've had Sean Connery suits, we've had Pierce Brosnan suits, we've had Roger Moore suits, we've had the Bond costumes come from us. Was there, as far as you're concerned, from working on the projects, because I'm pretty sure with most Bonds there's a military aspect, so you will have your fingers all over the Bond when it comes near Angels. So was there any a sort of point when it changed, or it was just a natural thing with the industry?
Well, I think partly it is a natural thing with the industry, because of course this goes hand in hand with something that we ought to really devote a whole kind of chat to, which is this whole thing about, costumes and costumes that have been worn by actors having a value outside of the purpose that they were created for, i.e. the film. Stephen and his organization, selling things, and that of course didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So I think that film companies or production companies are far more wary now and far more interested in actually owning the costumes and the uniforms that are used on a production. We know, don't we, that Bond's got a huge archive of things, and all the film studios now have archives of costume, which is why, the Game of Thrones people keep talking to us about that costume, and why the Dunkirk guy was quite interested in getting hold of that greatcoat that Branagh wore.
Yes.
So once upon a time, all of those things would come back into stock. Which is the Bond film with the submarines?
You're asking the wrong...
It's not a trick question, but it's Roger Moore. I know I should ask your brother, really. But, as I look up on my notice board, I've got one of the Spectre submarine crew badges on my board.
The fish.
The fish, and also the sub crew on that had a sort of orange. They all had an orange uniform. Now those were all made and came into the costume house together with all the Royal Navy uniforms, the number 8 shirts and trousers, and that all came back into stock afterwards. I suspect now, first of all, they'd probably CGI most of it, so there wouldn't be 200, Spectre subcrew orange uniforms produced and then brought in. And secondly, if whatever they did produce, I imagine they'd probably want to hang on to.
Yeah, that's true.
So that didn't really answer your question, but I think there's been a sea change, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years, whereas once upon a time we would expect to do a big chunk of a Bond film. Octopussy, all of those circus performers outfits would have been made. Roger Moore's clown outfits and the stuntmen would have been made. Roger Moore's suits probably would have been made. And that's changed. I remember on GoldenEye we certainly made things for Brosnan.
And so, just not to disappoint my brother or any other people who might be shouting at their iPhone or whatever they're listening on.
I was hoping you're going to edit.
It was the spy who loved me.
Right, okay, thank you.
Well, we hope you've been enjoying these conversations. We've been enjoying your feedback. If you have any questions or requests, please send them to podcast@angels.co.uk. Or you can visit our website, which is www.angelsbehindtheseams.com, or you can find us on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are /Costume Podcast. And here is Richard's chat with Suttirat.
Hello, I'm Richard Green, and today I am really, really pleased to be talking to Suttirat Larlarb. Good morning. I say good morning. It's afternoon here, but you, of course, are in New York. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good.
And thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time about your career, because it is a fascinating one. As you know, the idea of these is to give people an insight into the wonderful world of costume and how various people get into it. And your story, of course, is slightly more unusual than some of the other designers I've spoken to. So tell me, how did you get into this?
To costume design? Well, I'm not sure where to begin. There's like a few different beginnings in my career.
Right.
I'll just start by saying that I had trained as a painter, And while I was on I had done a artist's residency in an art colony in Vermont soon after I graduated from university, and it was there that I met a woman who was there, but she had been a student at the Yale School of Drama, learning and studying and training to be a theater designer.
Right.
And I sort of became friends with her and asked her a little bit more about it and decided to try applying. I had taken a costume design course in university in my first year and found it to be a great kind of synthesis of all the things I was interested in. Obviously there's the
Right.
fine arts component, but there was also the psychology, the anthropology, the costume history, the art history, the script work, the literature analysis, all of that stuff. And I had forgotten about it, or it wasn't that I'd forgotten about it. I probably wasn't considering it as a career choice until I met this woman 4 or 5 years later who was on her road to be hopefully doing it. I'm not sure if
Right.
she's doing it now, actually. I applied, and then when I was in that program, I studied primarily for design for theater, and that encompassed scenic design as well as costume design. And this is actually where it links to how I've come to work in the UK so much, is that when I finished that degree, because it had been kind of much more of a scenography kind of approach where you're designing the whole world of the play, the sets, the costumes. America, in the States at least, we separate the design disciplines through the unions.
I was going to say it's far
Yeah,
more unionized,
it's
isn't it? So
much more unionized.
you
Yeah,
can't do both. Yeah.
yeah. It's very rare too. And I was kind of on this role of thinking it was possible somewhere, and I knew that some of my most favorite international designers all happened to be based in Great Britain. Among them was Richard Hudson,
Yes. Yeah.
the stage designer. So I went to London. I was able to get a student visa. It was in the final year of my degree, my master's degree. And at that time, it allowed you to be in the UK for 6 months, as long as you had employment within the field that you had done your studies in. And I just through sheer stroke of luck, Richard had been working on The Lion King, the stage production in New York, and one of my classmates was one of the assistants on that in New York, introduced us, and pretty shortly after I arrived in London, I was working as one of Richard Hudson's assistants in London, which was fantastic. So I basically started my career in London as a scenic design assistant, though Richard had me do some research and things for his, because he does costume design very, very geniusly so. And while I was kind of working my way up through the set design kind of ranks of things, I was taking on small projects as a costume designer, but back in the States. So I was commuting back to the US to design costumes for theater. So it all began in theater, really. And because I kept my fingers in both parts of the pie, if that's a phrase, I was able
to.
Now.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. I think that as my career grew, there were directors that I worked with, but that recognized that I did both of these, that I wore both of these hats, and generously gave me the opportunity to try my hand at both of them when it made sense. So that's how it happened.
Because obviously I did a bit of research about this, and you went to Stanford for your bachelor's degree, didn't you? And then you went to Yale for your master's.
Yes.
Which I guess is a bit like going to both Oxford and Cambridge here. It's pretty high powered stuff. I'm impressed. So basically, I mean, and again, this comes up time and time again. People almost kind of fall into this. I mean, obviously you were inspired by somebody specifically to take this route, but you had an interest in art, you had an interest in drawing, you had an interest in all of those things, and then serendipitously it kind of gelled for you. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose there's a degree of that, and probably also just a recognition that all the things that I was interested in kind of coalesced in this field.
Yeah.
I did have a very keen interest in art and aesthetics, but I think I was searching for some something beyond just that, something where you could interact with another human being and it wouldn't just be about the conversation you were having with yourself while you're making the artwork. It needed to involve other people
Yeah. Yeah.
and a team. And somehow, I'm not sure I appreciated that till much later in my career, but I think that seed was always there, and I think that's probably how I operate at my best. And
Mm.
in fact, I would say that having that kind of team interaction and having several great right hands is always, I feel like, the foundation to having great ideas yourself. I can work in a vacuum, and I definitely need that breathing space to do that. But I think I also need the sounding board, to push me to do better. So
Yeah. So collaboration and again, a tripod is one of the most stable things you can get. So that collaboration is very important to you. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
I noticed, I mean, we'll talk about some specifics because, surprise, surprise, I will want to talk about the Olympics and I will want to talk about the new Bond film and I will want to talk about Danny Boyle. But basically, when you're initially approached with a project, whether it's a theatre or a film or would you like to design the opening ceremony for the London Olympics? Oh, yeah, sure. Well, let me think about that. I'm not too sure, shall I? What interests you? What actually sort of draws you in and gets you going on that? Is it the script, the person you're going to be working with, or what?
It is all of those things. It is those two specific things. Yes, the script. Yes, the people or the person I'm going to be working with. And funnily, you were sort of jokingly recounting a imagined scenario in which I was asked to do the Olympics and had that kind of response. And it went a little something like that, but in the kind of ironic, sarcastic way, whereas like if I had expressed any hesitation, it was purely a joke because of course I was going to do it. And I foolishly, it's one of those decisions you kind of just foolishly utter in the moment, not really knowing what you're going to take on. And probably if you knew what you were going to take on after you'd done it and you were re-asked to do it, you might think differently.
This is exactly what I was going to say to you because I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, I've forgotten however many million people saw it, but it was the spectacular of all spectaculars. I mean, everybody was concerned about outdoing Beijing and
Uh-huh.
everybody was talking about the budget and stuff like that. But it was a phenomenal, phenomenal thing. And I am curious to say, at the beginning when somebody asked you, was there that sort of moment before you hesitate to step off that bridge and bungee jump? Because once you've committed, you're just you're gonna go for it. You're gonna
You have to
plunge.
do it. Yeah.
Did you have a huge amount of doubt? It doesn't sound like you
No,
did.
I didn't have any doubt if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I was asked, and weirdly the strange story that leads up to the immediate saying yes to that prospect was that I had recently, prior to being asked by Danny Boyle, I had recently finished designing the film 127 hours, both the production design and the costume design. Very
Right.
handleable because it essentially, for all intents and purposes, it was very, very controllable, and that's a whole other conversation. But it meant sort of four to 6 months of all work all the time. I mean, there were no holidays, there were no evenings, there was nothing, no free time at all. I was kind of in the canyon with that
That was it.
character for
Yeah. Yeah.
that duration of that time. So I was pretty exhausted, and so much so that when I came back, I was talking to some friends, and they were saying, "Well, are you gonna take a rest now? That sounds like it sounds like you really just need to kind of take a breather." And I admitted right away, yes, I absolutely need to take a break and just kind of I wasn't in a hurry to go back to work, and whatever was gonna happen next, I was gonna want to be ready for it to be my best version of myself. Prior to 127 hours, we had finished Slumdog Millionaire, which is in some ways the opposite of 127 hours in the kind of cast of millions.
Well, yeah,
Um,
exactly. You go from one person,
Yes,
one person to
exactly. So,
thousands.
yes,
Yeah,
biggest city in the world to most populated city in the world to, one person in a canyon in the desert.
yeah, one of the
Um,
loneliest places on earth.
but so in response to this question, I jokingly said, Yeah, there's not a lot that would, cause me to break this new rule I'm setting up for myself, which is I need a proper amount of time off to recover and just re-energize and get
Mhm.
myself re-inspired and everything. And I remember thinking, but if somebody asked me to design the Olympics, I wouldn't say no. And I said it as a joke. And literally 2 weeks later, Danny called and posed this question to me, and I thought it was a joke, and then I realized it wasn't, and I said yes immediately, even though I was dead tired from my previous couple of years. So I took it on right in the moment, and it's the kind of thing where it almost you in order to take on something of that magnitude and to do it with the care and the diligence that everybody who took it on did, I think you kind of almost have to be unaware of how big the task at hand is. I think if
That
you
yeah,
get
yeah.
bogged down too much in analyzing how impossible everything is going to be or is or seems, you'll never move forward. And so, which is not to say that you don't make practical, technical, economical decisions, managerial decisions, what's within the realm of human capability in the amount of time with the amount of money. You absolutely have to take all of that under consideration. But I'm just
Mm.
talking about the philosophy of, are you going to be positive and charge into this the way you would maybe going into a war? Or would
Well,
you,
yeah.
or do you sit back and kind of break it down into all the reasons why it's just not possible and get overwhelmed by the hugeness
Mm.
of it?
I mean, I guess it's a bit like climbing a not that I ever have climbed a mountain, but I've climbed some hefty hills, and you think you're reaching the top of one, and then actually there's another bit to go, and then there's another bit to go. And I suppose if you stopped and contemplated the whole thing, the magnitude of the whole thing at the beginning, you'd scare yourself so much that maybe you'd never be able to make those steps.
That's
Those
exactly
first
right.
steps.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
right. And so it's a mental game, it's
Mm,
like
yeah,
you have to have a, and you sort of have to have a certain level of faith that all the people you've brought on to share in that journey with you are going to be at least in spirit similarly minded, and when they are not, you're going to have to be their cheerleader as the top of the food chain.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it wasn't just the rigor of checking off boxes for daily lists of to do things to do, and it wasn't
mm,
just the physical execution of getting things ready. It was also being the cheerleader to everybody who at various times throughout, including myself, just felt like it was, your faith or your energy levels just dropped, or you hit some kind of setback, or something might not arrive on time, all the things that go into our daily
yeah,
practice as
yeah,
designers. But it
yeah.
was happening on such a monumental scale that you were just like, oh my God, what? Like, something's going to show up on the day.
You were carrying the ball, weren't you? I mean, and again, one of the questions that I like to ask designers is how important is the team and the supervisor? Now, I know Marion Wise was on that. I mean, I'm sure there were hundreds and hundreds of people that were working on that production, but I do know
Yeah.
Marion. So,
So I had on the opening three supervisors. There was Marion, who
yeah,
was in charge of the. It was, I mean, it was a massive in terms of the costumes. You could kind of break it up into a few categories, even though there were tens of thousands of them. And Marion was looking after what we called the headline talent and anything that was the kind of filmed aspect of the ceremony. Obviously, that's her prowess. And
yeah.
um, brilliant at it, a brilliant supervisor, brilliant human being. Like, I could not have done it without her.
No, she
I
really is. Isn't she?
enjoyed every second of
Yeah,
every day with her. And if you enjoy the person that you're in the trenches with, then it's like a different story, isn't it? You can kind of do anything, and you can kind of laugh at all the absurdity of what you're being asked to do together, but also cares immensely about the product. And she brought, of course, with her all of her tried and true, all of her expertise, but all of the people she knew who could kind of attend to the various component parts that make up the whole. We also had Lorraine Ebden Price, who had come from theater and opera and dance. I believe she used to be the head of the Royal Ballet's costume shop years ago, and she had taken a leave of absence from costume world for some time, and was brought into the fold, and she was absolutely brilliant. So she handled, I'm not really sure if I can list everything she did. She did so much, but I remember she looked after the Mary Poppins sequence, the Brunel sequence, like the special makes, the special tailoring aspects. And then we had Anna Lau, who also comes from film and television, and a Glaswegian, and she started first, and when it became clear that the breadth of everything was going to be as massive as it was, and there were specific categories that needed to be looked after by separate specific set of eyes, she sort of looked, I think her primary, everybody kind of crossed over into everything, but I remember Anna's really huge contribution was looking after the manufacturing of the Industrial Revolution, anything we needed to make en masse. And of course we had a relationship with Angels at that point. We pulled an immense amount of things from that. The sheer numbers of costumes that were required for fittings, as well as what would end up there on the day, little specialty groups of people like the suffragettes. I think we drew all from Angels. And so it was, among many other things. That's just one example. I don't mean to kind of let everybody know that you only did that.
No. We apologise if anybody feels they didn't get a name. I'm curious to know who was the Dove Bikes wrangler.
That was essentially me. That was me and a few other people, obviously, who were in the costume. There were 75, so it was relatively speaking, a manageable number, but we had obviously a team we had the costume prop people on board. Tara Zafar was the head of costume for the Olympic ceremony, and put together a great team of kind of costume engineers. Neil Scanlon was involved, Vanessa Bastian, who kind of helped engineer, and Adam, who had helped engineer the actual movement of the wings. I had it started from a little sketch, and then for me, the really important thing was that, obviously you do a sketch and it's a static thing, and it can look beautiful or not. But the real trick with getting these costumes / props / vehicles to achieve the ideal iteration of what I had imagined was it was going to be a combination of obviously what they ended up looking like, what they ended up being made of, how they were made, but also how all of that was integrated with their movement and the engineering of the human being powering the costume, powering the bicycle, which was a sort of integral part to the idea of them, because the whole, I guess, motivation for everything we did as a creative team on the opening ceremony side of things was that we had this kind of that everything that was great about Britain that we would showcase in the ceremony needed to be traced back to individuals, like human powered, like a level of human being, like individual human being and groups of individuals. So having the Dove bikes, they couldn't just be mechanized and that you just stick it on and they do their own thing. Integral to it needed to be like the human power that made the wings move in that way and had to do with the motion of bicycling, and there were just so many links like that. So it was a real group effort to get them right, and I couldn't be more proud or thrilled with how they came out.
Well, I think deservedly so. I didn't realize they had beaks as well. I was looking at the picture the other day.
Yeah.
They've all got beaks.
So the idea was the helmet. I thought there's some of those very aerodynamic bike helmets that already kind of have the shape of, and obviously they would be derived from anything that would be aerodynamic, right? So the helmet already kind of had a bird's head shape, and then you think, well, you don't want to stick up a plastic beak on there. So they thought, okay, maybe it's a makeup thing, and they would you put a triangle of orange, fluorescent orange, because we knew it would be at night under the lights. And between putting a giant circle, a series of concentric circle vinyl stickers on the very plain white helmet, as an eye and the orange on the face as a beak. You just from a distance, wherever you were in the stadium, get the overall impression
Yeah.
as they're moving that they were birds. Yeah, doves.
Incredibly simple, but incredibly effective. Obviously, it was Danny Boyle who actually phoned you. I mean, because I know again that you've worked with him a lot, and he specifically asked you to do that gig. Yeah.
Yes, yes. We had just
Great.
finished 127 hours together, where I just, because I had done both aspects of design. I think he'd sort of gotten used to the idea that I was more than a costume designer, an idea person, and that
Yeah.
design of costumes or production design or product design or idea design was more of the kind of the pull of anything for me. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I am interested in that relationship because there are other examples of costume people who work with directors. I'm thinking of Janty Yates with Ridley Scott, or when Derek Jarman was working with Sandy Powell. There obviously is there is obviously a mutual trust there and a respect, and you become, if you like, the go-to person. Should never be complacent about that, of course, but it is nice, isn't it, to be asked back and to be to be trusted in that way.
Yeah, and I definitely don't take for granted, I would never presume that it's a done and dusted deal for the rest of our lives. I think that
Yeah,
one thing that I do know about Danny is he definitely wants to outfit each of his projects with whoever he thinks is right for that particular project. So I am very, very aware that there are things that he's done in the past, even while we'd already had a long-standing professional working relationship, that I wouldn't be the right person for, or going forward that maybe I won't be the right person for. But for whatever we have managed to work on together, it's part of his grand plan to bring specific people to do specific things that he may not even reveal to you in the beginning, but he has some kind of inclination towards. And I think, you can kind of see this with how he has worked with actors. Oftentimes I think even the careers of some very, very household name actors now can be derived down to how he and his casting partner Gail have cast these films of his, where there are people who he likes to take a chance on. He sees the potential in them, and he knows, okay, with
yeah,
that potential, it will turn into something brilliant. And they might not be a household name. I mean, I'm definitely, I count myself in that list, but like prior to Train Spotting, prior to Shallow Grave, the careers of Ewan McGregor and Kelly MacDonald and Cillian
yeah,
Murphy
yeah,
or 28 Days Later, those were people who he saw something, and they had obviously careers before him, but I think he's never swayed by like, you need to put the big name, everybody knows
yeah,
this is going to get you all the money in the world to produce your project. He wants it to be the right person for what he wants, what his
yeah,
vision
yeah,
is, and sometimes it means taking a chance on a relatively unproven name.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so it's a nice environment to be in, because it's one where you're trusted to bring to it what he has seen a seed of earlier in, if that makes sense. He's
Yeah,
very
no,
collaborative.
absolutely.
He wants you to run with ideas. He might direct you in one way or another with one piece of reference or something he saw recently that he wants you to investigate further. But I think also for him, knowing that he can trust the collaborators that he's brought on board over the course of his career, knowing that he has a shorthand with them also helps him progress further with his part of the endeavor, because it means that, all right, I don't have to worry about, not that I don't have to worry about, but I don't have to worry that my wishes or my remit, or however you want to put it, aren't going to be very well looked after, or
Yeah.
every stone won't be unturned, or things
Mm.
won't be vetted, or there's a shorthand that develops with a long-standing
Yes.
relationship. Yeah.
And I do consider you a very nuanced and reflective designer as well. I mean, I think there are some designers that are instinctive, but I get the impression that you're very much thinking all the way around this and researching it and putting an awful lot of effort into it before you've even kind of formulated sometimes what that specific costume is going to look like. Is that a fair statement?
I
I
probably
meant it as a
put,
compliment.
yeah,
So.
yeah. No, I definitely, I would agree with you that I spend a lot of time, probably more time than anybody else is interested in. But yeah, no, I don't know what happens. Like some days I feel very like, oh, just let it go, Suttirat. Nobody's going to notice that one little thing that's going to cause, this domino effect of everybody throwing their arms at going like, oh my God, we have to do that. On the other hand, sometimes I know that it's exactly the right thing that will take it to a level of, it could be just for the actor's performance. It could just be a little character thing for them to hold on to that allows them to just be more fully in the moment and not worry about pretending to be that character.
Right. Yeah.
So it could be a very subtle thing, or it could be a more bombastic thing where we're just the difference between this tattersall and that tattersall, that one stripe isn't just right. So do we have to go in and then add like 1/8 of an inch of a stripe by hand to this pinstripe?
And
It's like,
this sounds like an actual experience. Have you done that?
yeah, I've definitely done that.
You've
I
done
won't
that.
say
Okay,
that I did not do that on a film that involved doing it on multiple things, but I
okay.
have done that. Yes.
Fine. So it's
Yeah.
either a little hook for them to kind of hold on to and just give them a little bit of extra stability, or it's something that's really, really going to make a big difference to the way you think the thing's going to look, even if it's
Yeah.
weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And I would say like probably the easiest example, the yellow dress for the little Latika and Slumdog. I feel like we just turned Indian fabric shops and vendors and merchants upside down looking for the perfect yellow
Mm.
calico, woodblock print, anything that felt like I knew what it was when I found it, but I wasn't seeing it for, I mean, I don't even know how many. And I never thought of myself as someone who was like, it's a very nuanced thing. It sounds very, very entitled to be thinking, oh, well, I can spend months looking for the degree of difference between this yellow and that yellow, which
Mm.
you're not going to even get to control once the film is graded and how it's
Yeah,
projected in the theater, but in the moment what you want. And it's that je ne sais quoi thing, I think, that many, if not all,
yeah.
designers have, where you just know it when you see it. And if it's not there and things aren't speaking to you, it's not done.
Do you think, Suttirat, that you always have one kind of key piece costume in your productions? And this has just come to me, so I mean, it may or may not be the case. Is there always one piece or one costume that you think, yeah, that's kind of holding it all together for me?
I half yes, half no. I think it's I try to think of the whole,
Yeah.
and in thinking of individual, not just costumes or looks, but individual pieces of costumes and looks, usually it starts with one thing that makes everything else fall into place, and that could be within the realm of one actor's specific costume for a specific scene, or it can be that whole character's track of costumes and how it fits in to the bigger picture, the bigger arc of design, the bigger arc of the story, how
Right.
the tribes of the film or the theater piece need to work. How can we identify that group? How can we identify that group subliminally, but also interestingly? So yeah, there's always, I guess I'm going to revise that. Yes, there is probably always one thing that once you find that thing, and it's a different thing on every project,
Yeah.
everything else kind of falls into place, makes sense. And you end up sometimes revising what you thought was an answer before, and you might have gone down quite a far path with it, but you just, because it's a rolling process, I think some,
Yeah.
until you've designed some films on crazy schedules, I think you think when you come fresh out of school, you can kind of, well, I'm going to design the whole thing and it's going to go tickety boo just like this, right? But
Yeah.
what you don't realize, or what I didn't realize, and then I came to very, very heavily respect as a necessarily part of the process, and something to always be aware of, is that you are designing with a big picture mindset from the beginning. You do have you might have a kind of general or specific layout of how you
Mhm.
see the world coming to life in terms of the costumes. But because you're doing it on a schedule, you're having to integrate everything that comes with doing it on a schedule, which means that it upends other things on the schedule, which means what is the first costume that you ever shoot on a film? What is that part of the story? What day in the story does that place? I mean, I worked on a film where the first costume on the principal actor, it was Paul Dano in a small indie film I did in New York. The first costume we shot on in the whole film was the one where he had gone through the worst night of his life, and it was like the end of a very long journey in the film. So it was kind of like his worst look.
Right.
Like,
the most broken down,
the most
yeah.
broken down, the most. So I know, as the costume designer, and the team knows, and the director knows, and in that case, a team of directors, husband and wife that I work with a little bit, and the actor knows what the journey is. But we get on set and there's 100 or 200 people looking at you, and this is your first representation of your work, and they're just judging you like, and they don't get it. They don't get it at all. But they're all focused on their part of the jobs, and they might kind of on paper get it, but it's like the day that the executives show up, and like, it's the day that all the important people are there to kind of wish everybody well, and it's not the sexy, heroic,
right, yeah,
quirky, brilliant design that everybody can recognize. And so that psychology of even that kind of factors into how you make decisions going forward. You sometimes might need to add a level of something to please all those judgments that are going to befall you on day one, because you're trying to protect the rest of the film and make people understand that you do have a plan in place. In that case, Paul is such a great collaborator, and we had such a great time on that film, and he's so method in his approach to the costume that I love that. I really love working with actors who
so he made it believable then,
he made it really believable to the point where it wasn't that I had just given him like excuse my French, I'm gonna just like a not can I say shitty? Sorry, it was like
absolutely. You go for it.
I gave him like a shitty set of rags to wear on day one. Like, I wasn't looking after him. We weren't looking after him, but because he embodied the character so much and it helped him, and we worked so closely together, he was able to. The costume wasn't wearing him. He was really just embodying the character.
He was that character.
And the costume was a kind of extension of his behavior rather than anything else. So, there's things like that you don't really realize when you come out of school that are going to be part of the design process.
Now you kind of answered a question that I was going to do at the end, and I haven't finished with you yet, by the way. So if you're okay for time still, I am too.
Yeah.
That's sort of one piece of advice that you would offer anybody who was looking to come into the business. And I know that's how do you sum it up in one piece of advice? But what do you think it is important to say to people who are starting out in the business?
I think, there's funny. I've changed the answer to this question a few times, and I think they're all valid. All my responses, I think, are valid to this question, but I think probably this one might be for the times we're living in right now. And it's just like, I think the faith that if you've made the decision to pursue this, you kind of have to have faith that it's, as long as you kind of keep at it, and that means you're going to get rejections, you're going to be told that there's no space for you in a department, you're going to be told lots of things that seem to be obstacles. Yes, all of those things will happen. But on the other hand, after that happens, or maybe it doesn't happen right away, maybe you're one of the lucky ones who gets a foot in the door right away, and you get to work with some amazingly generous designer who shepherds you so that you can blossom pretty quickly into this industry. Or you work with people who recognize what your contribution is, even though you've come on as, for instance, at an entry-level PA position, and you feel a little bit out of the action because you're not in the fittings, or you're not getting to go on set as much as everybody, or whatever. I think making yourself invaluable to whatever role you've been brought in to do is the best way to be, for the door to open a little wider for your next project. I think when you spend your time lamenting that you'd rather be, or you should be doing something else somewhere else, that weirdly, I think that that transmits, and so people, it's such a personal business, right? You spend an inordinate amount of time with people
Yeah,
in, well, pre-pandemic close quarters, more than you would your family and friends in some cases, with a level of intensity
yeah,
and stress that is hard to rival. And I
yeah,
think that you just, everything you can do to kind of remain positive about why you've taken on this adventure in whatever role you've been brought on to do is going to be a valuable stepping stone to whatever's next. And everybody I know who's
yeah.
been successful has a story like this. I remember the first
Mm.
film project I worked on. It was in the art department, I would say, but like it, I remember taping down location photos and file folders for days on end, thinking, "Oh my God, I have a Yale degree. I shouldn't be taping down photos in a Manila
Yeah,
envelope." And
yeah,
I kept it to myself, and I didn't think that the whole time, but I do remember it thinking after like the second week of doing it, was it ever going to change, and was I going to have to do this for years and years? And obviously it did change, and I didn't do it for years and years. And I didn't do it for very much longer on that film. But what it taught me when I became a designer is that I needed to probably spend a little time with the not just my immediate right hand, but like if I could, all the juniors that would come on, just to kind of make them understand their important role in it, which
yeah,
seems on the surface not so important by virtue of
yeah,
the fact you're not in the actual room with the Daniel Craig in the
yeah,
fitting, but
yeah.
you're you are such a vital part of the process, and it
Part of it.
really can't happen without you. And the
Mm.
designer and the people above you really need to feel like they can rely on you. So just be the best at
Yeah,
that role,
yeah.
and you will be elevated and rewarded pretty quickly. Your level of responsibility will grow.
And I bet you did that job really well and with really good grace, and nobody apart from you knew that you were a bit kind of pissed off about it at various
I,
times.
I, yeah,
Which I think
I
is
mean,
right. You know,
yeah.
sorry, if you give off, if you give off negative, hard done by attitude,
Oh
then
yeah.
people are going to pick up on that. You know,
Oh, they
people, and
absolutely do. I mean, I use that as an example, as like just a moment. I wasn't bitter throughout the whole thing. I
no,
wasn't
no, no,
thinking, oh, like, I wasn't weighed down by that. I just use that as an example to
sure,
say that I understand that there will be lots of people coming out of various programs or with connections that they've had or experience
yeah,
they've had on lower budget things where they've kind of done a lot more than what they end up doing on a bigger thing at the outset.
yeah,
And it's just to say that everybody goes through a version of that. And it's just how you navigate those. You need to sort of check yourself, I think, and realize that you're part of a process as opposed to anything
yeah.
else.
And I still maintain. I bet you were the best photo sticker down on Manila envelope that
I
they ever
probably
had.
did waste a lot of time realigning photos, yes. Um,
So listen, Bond. There we are. No Time to Die. Well, I'm
yeah.
not sure there ever is, but no, that's was it good?
Yes, it was. I mean,
What an unfair question.
I'm just gonna preface this by saying I can't really speak that much about it. I can tell you,
No, no,
obviously
no,
we
no, no.
worked,
I know. I no.
yeah,
I'm really not going to ask you for any plot lines. I'm not going
yeah,
to ask you for any dirt on any of this stuff.
yeah,
But it's a franchise movie. It comes
yes.
with I would think, a huge amount of responsibility and
Oh yeah,
expectations.
yeah,
You and I had meetings in the office at the beginning, and obviously Michael and I dealt with some things along the way. And
yeah.
I'm just, I say, let's just get out the fact that you've just designed the latest Bond film. Let's leave it like that. And say that it was a bundle of laughs, and one day we'll talk about it.
But yes, I want to thank you for I think probably what I can say, and I mean it's well publicized. It was a kind of a bumpy start. We started,
Hmm.
I think I was on it, all told, 18 months, and that's too long. I mean, everybody should get to be on a film for 18 months. It would be really thoroughly thought about. But when we first met, well, not first met ever, but on the Bond film, I think it was months and months before we ever sat down to go through specifics, or you sat down with Sarah or Michael to go through specifics with. But the script changed countless times.
Yeah,
The settings, the locations, all that stuff was in flux for a while. So it was probably, in terms of a costume process, quite difficult to. A Bond franchise film comes, yes, with loads of responsibility. And there's lots of
Hmm.
processes that are already in place that have worked in the way they've worked for years on end, which allow that film to be what it is. And some of
Yeah.
those are long-standing brand partnerships. Some of those are
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
way costumes need to be produced, costumes need to be readied. All that stuff
Yeah.
requires an immense amount of pre-thought, pre-planning, and execution time. And the longer we went without some knowledge of what we were going to need to be doing, the harder it was to imagine that we could maintain the expectation that we had set out for ourselves, and certainly that people would have of a Bond film.
Yeah.
The mantle of responsibility grew heavier and heavier for me. I will say, when we had those moments where we weren't sure what was going to happen, how much the script would be changing, how all those things. But I will say, through having an amazing, like, the best team, Michael Mooney as the associate designer, Sarah Robinson as the supervisor, and then all, the two wonderful assistant designers, Ava and Kristen. And then the team of, I think at any one day we had 56 or 57 people full time in
Yeah.
the various parts of the costume world department on Bond. And then on big days that could double or triple. But the core group of people, I truly, I felt it was the first time I felt on a film, probably because I also had the time to think about it, where you, as a designer, felt like your only responsibility was to design. Like,
Yeah.
I had,
Yeah.
the team just did, I just had the best, most dedicated and serious team that you could ever want to be able to.
Supporting you.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
had such a great support network, and when you have that support network, you can kind of, all those challenging things are much more surmountable, and so you
Yeah.
don't stop yourself from, you don't lessen your expectation of yourself just because all the other things have conspired to make it seem impossible. I will say, after doing the Olympics, your relationship to what's possible and your relationship to numbers changes.
Well,
Um,
I was going to ask you actually. At any point during the Bond film did you go, "God, it was never this hard on the Olympics"?
Yeah, well, I think probably all designers will agree that everything they're doing is probably the hardest thing they've done. You somehow, every project is somehow, it just expands to fill the time that you have, doesn't it? So
Talking about time you have, again, I'm always interested in this because, of course, I come in on a Monday and I work all the way through, or allegedly finish on a Friday, and at the weekends I go home and I take holidays. How's your life-work balance? Do you manage to kind of keep that fairly good, or
um, well, that's I'm not a good example of someone who has a good work-life balance. I think I think probably the balance that I might emit is more a personality thing than a actual life
right?
scheduling thing. Because I've tended to work out of my home base, meaning, like, I haven't worked for many years in New York properly as a film designer. I tend to be away, and when you're away, it's easier to just kind of be consumed by the work because you
Yeah,
don't have the normal things that you need to attend to when you're at home to deal with.
yeah,
So I kind of throw myself in whole hog to these projects, and I don't have much time for anything. But having said that, that's why the team is incredibly important. You don't set out to create a team necessarily for it to be your social group, but it kind of de facto becomes that way. And
hmm
so you want to surround yourself by people who you can have a rushed dinner with, or
yeah,
you're working but you're having dinner together, or you have, a little bit of decompression with when you're off on location. You just want to make sure, because they take up that space that you would normally have reserved
yeah. The
for.
sort of film
Yes,
family, then, I
that's right.
guess. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, yeah. And do you tend to Suttirat to take breaks between projects? I mean, again, I suppose it depends whether you're invited to do one straight
Yeah.
away or not. But do you
Yeah.
try and
I'm
try and pace
I
yourself a little bit?
I always try. I always think I'm going to. I try to. And on several,
Right.
I'd say in recent years, I've gotten better about if some lovely project, amazing opportunity is dangled before me before I'm finished with whatever I'm working on. Now I'm saying, right, when you're finished with this, you can go straight onto this. If that thing is too good to turn down, I'm saying this with air quotes, I've got better. I used to just be like, okay, I'll just do this and then I'll take my break. And now I might still take it on, but I will tell the other project, well, I absolutely want to do this project. It would be a dream to work with this director or on this project or whatever the enticement is. But I have to tell you that for me to be the best version of me, which will work for you 100,000%, like you don't know me yet, but you are going to I'll be like so on it. I definitely need just a little period to decompress from this. And if that doesn't work for you, then I'll respectfully pass. I just know that I won't be at my best if I go straight onto it. And luckily that's worked. Like I've gotten to
getting away with it.
Yeah, I've gotten to have in some cases, a couple of months off before diving in. And obviously that can kind of only happen at its best when you have a good team that you can rely on, so that someone can kind of start before you to lay the groundwork, set up the department, whatever. But oftentimes, I think probably what's changed over the years for me is my ability to recognize that if I'm saturated, I need to kind of step back for a second and recharge. And if the project is something that's worth doing, it needs me at my best. And so I've become better about recognizing that if I don't ask for a little bit of a break before that and they decline, then I'm okay if they decline. It hasn't happened yet, luckily, and I will take that as a testament to like them really wanting me to be on the project. So
So you really do feel it's very important to get match fit, because I can't ever imagine you being satisfied with offering people second best you. You know,
no,
I think you will always want to give 150% of yourself. And you're right. You need to train, or you need to get kind of match fit for that next bout, because you can't go one fight, second fight, third fight, fourth fight without some breaks. I think that's very commendable.
Yeah, and I would say someone like Michael Mooney is a kind of a brilliant partner in crime for me, because he's the same way. And what would often happen on Bond, or that was our fourth thing together, I think, on any of them, is he recognizes this quality in me, I recognize it in him, and he has a family to go home to, so he's very good about, at the end of the workday, if he needs to leave, he'll leave. But if he sees me staying, and if he doesn't necessarily need to be home right away, he might stay to just kind of keep me company, make sure that I don't stay too late. And then by turn, I kind of think, oh, I don't want to keep Michael here. So I'll pack up and leave.
All right, yeah.
So it's kind of, it might be reverse it might be reverse psychology or something. But
guilt tripping
no,
into leaving.
But he's so he's the same way. I mean, you've worked on with him many, many more times than I have, and he's kind of the best at everything. Really.
Last time, the best at everything. Last time I spoke to him, he was sort of hand carving his new kitchen. He was like designing it and building it, and it was an amazing thing. No going to IKEA for that boy.
No.
Yes,
it has to be just so. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Just bang on. Well, listen, this has been really good. I've really, really appreciated it. I really have.
So it's actually nice to, because of the world we've been in for the last half a year, it's actually nice to recall, the glory days of pre-pandemic.
Yeah, when it was, when life was normal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to just remind you why you do things and who, what matters and all that.
Hopefully it won't be too long before we do see you again.
Yeah, I feel like the working in London is probably, I mean, if I had to say, it's almost like my base more than anywhere else. I feel the most at home working in London. I feel like because I started my career there, maybe I've been tooled to work in the British system, in the London costume world or whatever. But I just it feels very comfortable, and it does feel very different when I'm not there. So I hope I get to come back soon. Yeah.
Stay safe, look after
And you.
yourself,
And you.
and again, thank you so much.
No problem, Richard.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Be safe. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Richard's conversation with Suttirat. I thoroughly enjoyed that, Richard.
And so did I.
The thing that struck home with me during it is what she said about if you're wanting to work in the industry or if you're doing a certain job, be it an assistant or a runner or anything like that, was you've got to believe in what you want to do, but what you're doing, you do your best job doing, and that'll get you further. So just knowing what you want to do.
Well, focus.
Yes, exactly. So it was a great conversation. It was lovely to hear about the Olympics in so much detail and about not the chaos, but how just juggling that. And then I suppose if you compare that to Bond, it sounds like it prepared her perfectly.
Yeah. It was never like this at the Olympics.
I think what's also interesting as well from the chat, which is the Olympic ceremony was phenomenal, and I watched it. And when you watch it, you don't realise just how many people were involved in putting that together, and you just don't know the sheer work that went into doing that. I mean, London Olympics, that was months and months of research and working and making. And
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't want you to think that I have these facts to my fingertips, but I've just done a quick check, and it says that there was something like 900 million people watched it, which is not nothing. And the budget for that was £27 million, which was actually more than they'd originally budgeted for. Yeah, and it was a massive spectacle, wasn't it? What they did was I think amazing, especially the opening one, which is all those sort of things that were quintessentially English or British. And the other thing I would say is that if it's been a fair number of years now since that, but if anybody gets the chance just to go on and look at the images from that opening ceremony, it really is an amazing thing.
There are so many things, whether it be Kenneth Branagh with a small speech that he did, whether it was Sergeant Pepper's, whether it was the Mary Poppins, the nurses, everything. There were so many tiny little details that I guarantee you, if you watch it again, you pick up something new each time.
And we didn't even mention Her Majesty parachuting in.
No, we didn't even mention that at all. So
yeah, and again, very generous
Yes.
in her praise and recognition of her team. And I also thought very, very significant that it's not just the assistants that I need to encourage; it's all the people in the team. And I need to spend time with the people that are way down the line, if you like, and sort of involve them and bring them on as well, which I thought was a very nice thing.
Definitely is a testament to what she's like and the experience that she's had, from whether it be sticking down photos on pieces of envelope or whether it's keeping an eye on the entire aesthetic of a man with his arm trapped in a mountain, or an Olympic ceremony.
Yes. Yeah. And I realised that I used really quite a lot in that, but I really did enjoy talking to her. It was a very enjoyable one, and a bit bizarre to be sitting there in the afternoon here. Now you're talking to somebody at 10 o'clock in the morning in New York as well. So
the next conversation we're going to be releasing is Jonathan's chat with Sinead Cadell.
Oh yes, which
covers lots of areas, Jonathan, including sustainability.
Sinead is passionate about the whole industry, that in terms of its sustainability and waste. It's primarily about waste and focusing on how we as practitioners in an industry, whether it's angels, whether it's film companies, can approach the process in a way that is seen to be not burning up resources. And whether it's theatre, film, opera, whatever the medium, it is considered. There's a lot of waste.
This isn't just sort of plastic bags when you don't need to. This is more like recycling clothes and using things.
Yeah.
The whole gamut.
And she created a little compendium of contacts that specialised in secondhand fabrics, sustainable processes in weaving and milling fabrics, dyeing techniques, and she is in conversation with organisations like BAFTA.
Well, it's definitely something I'm looking forward to talking to, because it's also interesting with, which we'll probably get into on that episode a lot more, with how you sometimes operate in the making rooms with certain fabrics and certain materials. Whether it was planned, angels do it, it's actually how we operate anyway. But I'll look forward to that conversation next week.
we all have to have a responsibility
Yes.
for our practice and how we change from being a throwaway culture to a hold on culture and make things work.
And if that position wasn't hard enough before COVID happened, if you think about now the gloves, the masks, and everything that we're now one use and throwing away, it's now even harder to have the conversation, but even more important to have it now. So here's a small extract from Jonathan's conversation with Sinead.
Across the board, the film industry needs to change. There's lots of problems with the industry as a whole, but one of them is that it's not regulated, it's short-term contracts, and that needs to change in a sense, but the only people who can change it are those of us working within it. And we can shift the culture and we can change the culture. And I think often people get fixated on certain aspects of like air travel, for example, but the fashion and textiles industry is 8% of global emissions. The airline industry is 2%. And yet, even as the film industry tries to move to there's the BFI have recently produced a study, and they're trying to look at ways to get the film industry to move to a net zero carbon emissions, which is, very admirable. But actually, the reality is very few people think about how our department works. And in all their analysis of the film industry as a whole and its carbon impact, costume doesn't even figure. So it's just not even calculated. No one knows what our impact is. And when you look at the impact of the fashion and textiles industry, and then you think about what we manufacture and our output, actually our impact is huge. And I'm not saying it's going to change overnight, and I'm in no way an expert on sustainability or, I'm a filmmaker, but I think you have to look at kind of the people working in our industry and say, what can we do and where do we want to be? And if we want to go and say we're going to be net zero carbon emissions by 2030, which is kind of where we need to be, how are we going to get there?